because we owe it to society, we owe it to humanity to provide these inmates an opportunity to get a job when they're out of prison and start their lives over and be productive members of society. And that's what we'll do, work toward, especially when we get the new prison up and running.
Welcome to a special episode of the Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight. I'm your host, Megan O'Brien. I sat down for an interview with each of the Republicans seeking their party's nomination for governor in the June 2nd primary election. I asked each of them the same set of questions. In this series of episodes, you'll hear more from each candidate about their goals for state policy on abortion, data centers, and economic development, among other topics. I also asked each candidate to share their big idea for South Dakota. You just heard from Governor Larry Rhoden. The rancher from rural Union Center took over as governor last year after his predecessor, Kristi Noem, left to lead the National Department of Homeland Security. Before serving as lieutenant governor, Rhoden served 16 years in the state legislature, including leadership positions such as House Majority Leader. One of Rhoden's major accomplishments as governor has been convincing legislators to begin construction of a $650 million men's prison in Sioux Falls. That will replace the oldest parts of the penitentiary. The state is also building an $87 million women's prison in Rapid City. You'll hear the governor reference these projects in the interview. This past legislative session, there'd been a focus on abortion legislation, including restricting abortion medications coming into the state, and further defining what an abortion procedure is. Abortion is already illegal in the state, except to preserve the life of the mother. If elected, do you see the need for further regulations or legislation when it comes to abortion, and what do you see that looking like?
Well, I think some of the legislation that we went through this year was a result of current events. So I'll never say never that I think we're at a good place in South Dakota. But when a company was advertising for the abortion pill coming into our state, we took action on that and ended up passing legislation to address that and keep that from coming into our state. So, that was a case of the circumstances dictating the need for legislation, and so we took action to protect the unborn in South Dakota.
Do you see there needing to be further regulations or restrictions on abortion access then in the future?
Not right now, I don't. I can't think of, I think we've got pretty sound laws on the books, and we strengthened them this year, and I feel pretty comfortable with where we're at right now.
Obviously, property tax kind of dominated the conversation in the legislature this year. But aside from providing relief and reductions for all homeowners, there was also a lot of talk about expanding programs that would give relief to people who are veterans, people who are seniors or disabled and on fixed incomes. Do you want to see more South Dakotans taking advantage of those programs, and how would you promote or expand those programs?
Well, so that's exactly what we've done the last couple of years. Last year, if you recall, Senate Bill 216 that I put together a task force, and we carried that, was kind of to stop the bleeding, but it did some significant things in addition to just capping the amount house valuation could go up in a year. It addressed the current laws that we have on the book for tax freeze, raised the income substantially of the household that was members that would make them still eligible for that tax freeze, and also raised the maximum price of the house. So we expanded that program last year. We addressed that more this year in specific legislation. So we took action on that. So there's a lot of programs out there that I think people aren't aware of, and we can do a better job of making sure that they're aware of it. When I've talked to people that have given me anecdotal stories about people being taxed out of their houses, some of that is kind of suspect, because I know if a lot of the circumstances that they tell me about, that they would be eligible for tax freezes and programs that have on the books and have been on the books for a number of years.
More than 1,000 Medicaid enrollees in the state could potentially lose coverage as new federal work requirements set in over the next year. That's according to the Department of Social Services. What would you as governor do to address that change?
Well, we'll address them as they come. I'm not real familiar with what they are, the work requirements are at this point, but obviously in South Dakota we support work requirements for Medicaid recipients, and so we'll support that law and deal with it as the guidelines are dictated to us.
What do you think the state's role in economic development should be, and how would you establish or continue that role?
Well, I think, the biggest thing the state can do for businesses and economic development is give business owners and people that would move businesses here the opportunity to succeed with lower regulations and smaller government, and then get out of their way. We have different programs to provide a helping hand in some cases, and existing businesses expanding or businesses moving here. But we've done a very good job of providing opportunity in South Dakota, and that's what we'll continue to do.
A lot of recently enacted laws in South Dakota could make it harder to vote, including new regulations requiring people to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and a new way for people to challenge another voter's ability to vote. What policies would you pursue to address voting access in the state?
Well, we've supported common sense reforms as far as, I don't think it's unreasonable that you provide proof that you are a citizen, and that's part of, it's already being done in our, I look at my driver's license and it already indicates on my driver's license that I'm a citizen. So, we've covered a lot of that ground in years past with the Real ID, and so I don't think that we have, where we're headed provides a disincentive to vote, that some people would say. I think we've applied common sense and reasonable thinking in a requirement that you prove you are who you say you are, and that you're a voting citizen.
Some of the concern is that setting up these systems of requiring proof of citizenship when you're registering to vote could set up additional burdens for people who might not have access to their birth certificates or their passports. I guess I'm just curious your response to that criticism.
If that's a legitimate concern, show me. If there are circumstances where we've went too far, or there's something that we had not realized, bring it to our attention. There's a lot of conjecture, but we're dealing in facts. And if there's areas that we've made it too restrictive or cumbersome for people to vote, we'll deal with that. But you need to show us.
Regulations for data centers in South Dakota were also on the table for a lot of lawmakers this year. How would you regulate data centers, if at all?
Well, I think they came up with kind of a guidelines for data centers and passed that legislation, and I supported that. So I think we've kind of landed in a place that's adequate.
You feel comfortable with the legislation that's been passed through?
I do.
The western part of the state saw significantly less snow this winter, and thousands of acres were burned by wildfires out west. How does the state play a role in positive change when it comes to climate change or environmental disasters, and how would you kind of try to make those changes?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, but I'll say this: we provide assistance, and did in the case of the fires out west, and provided assistance. We have interstate compacts, and we'll provide assistance in other states, and they provide assistance here. But from a good government standpoint, we'll continue that policy, and it's worked very well to help mitigate some of these disasters that or potentially stop them before they become major disasters, and especially when it comes to fires.
Where do you think that the state's relationship stands with tribal nations in the state, and how would you plan to continue or grow that relationship?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's always been ongoing tension. In the last 16 months since I've taken office, we have really, I think, come a long way toward lessening that pressure. I've been very encouraged at the meetings I've had, a number of them impromptu meetings. I think a lot of times that's a more desirable way to meet folks, that we've kind of had these accidental meetings, including this year during the State of the Tribes address. Afterwards, we were going to meet with some officials from the Oglala Sioux tribe, and there were a lot of tribal members in the Capitol. And noticed us going into my conference room. We end up with 60, 70 tribal members in the conference room from 7 of the 9 tribes, or 8 of the 9 tribes, and chairman from 6 of the 9 tribes in the meeting. And we had a great, probably an hour and a half, just discussion and give and take conversation and questions, and some things we agreed on, some that we didn't, but we had a very productive meeting, and everybody walked away with, on both sides, very encouraged. And even more recently, I had a chance meeting with the Oglala Sioux tribe at the lodge in Deadwood, and went in and visited with them. So all that to say is I've been pretty happy with where we're at right now. We've got an open line of communication with the tribes, and we recognize their sovereignty. We respect that, and we leave them be. And if they need assistance from the state, we'll take their calls and provide assistance when it's needed.
About half of the existing inmates in South Dakota end up returning to prison within 3 years of release. How will you as governor work to redirect those inmates?
Well, that's what I've been doing for the last 16 months, working extremely hard on that, including, the biggest issue was getting the prison across the finish line. Our current facility, a huge part of what's wrong with our current facility is, when I toured it, I was just appalled by the conditions in that prison and the overcrowding, and our lack of ability, because of that overcrowding and the facility they're in, to rehabilitate, have programs for rehabilitation. So that was a huge part of the importance of funding the new prison and building a new prison. Our recidivism rate is not acceptable, and unfortunately, with the current facility, there was no way around trying to, help that issue. So the new prison, in addition to resurrecting that discussion, I created a task force on rehabilitation, and they've met several times now, and they have several subcommittees, and we've already covered a great deal of ground as far as what the new rehabilitation program will look like with the new prison. And because we owe it to society, we owe it to humanity to provide these inmates an opportunity to get a job when they're out of prison and start their lives over and be productive members of society. And that's what we'll do, work toward, especially when we get the new prison up and running. I will say the women's prison is, it's ahead of the men's prison. It'll be opening that here in a couple months, and we invested I think $13 million this year in ongoing funding to create a drug treatment program. So nearly 100 female inmates can take 4 to 5 hours of classes every single day. And if you look at the percentage of those female inmates that are there for for drugs, it's something like 80%, 90% of them. So all of that has a huge potential to help turn the problem around as far as recidivism.
And when we look back at past governors of South Dakota, a lot of them have kind of made their mark on the state. Peter Norbeck founded Custer State Park. George Mickelson had his year of reconciliation that kind of brought together the state and Native Americans. And Bill Janklow used prison inmates to rewire K-12 buildings, college buildings throughout the state for internet access. Obviously, there's a lot of other accomplishments from a lot of those folks, but what do you see as your big specific vision for the future of South Dakota?
Well, a couple things, kind of as a honorable mention, I guess, it's been mentioned, Janklow wiring the schools. Well, in the last 3-4 years, we've invested almost $500 million in South Dakota for rural broadband. And that's on the same magnitude, if not more so in some ways, than Bill Janklow's wiring the schools. Because you think of the opportunity that provides in rural South Dakota when we have all these vast, sparsely populated areas, for them to have the same opportunities in Riva, South Dakota as they do in downtown Sioux Falls. So, that's just a sign line as a starting point. We've got a lot of things to be extremely excited about in South Dakota. Our economy is growing well. We're the second lowest tax in the state in the nation. And I announced last year at the State of the State that the next big industry, and that's what I'll talk about more specifically, is national security. We have a huge amount of potential in that area, starting with, food security is national security. And we grow, we feed the world in South Dakota. We're an ag state, always will be. And that, in addition to the expansion at Ellsworth, we already have startup businesses that have been focused on the defense industry, and we have the potential to make that into a huge economic boost, economic engine for the state of South Dakota, and one that will last for generations to come.
And then as a final question, is there anything else that you want the voters of South Dakota to know? Well,
I think, I've tried to put myself in the position of being a voter and what you must think. And I just encourage people to do your research. We've seen millions of dollars this year expended on not just negative attack ads, but blatantly false negative attack ads, and more than I've ever seen in South Dakota. So I would just encourage people to be vigilant, be wise, be informed on what they're hearing, and if you have questions, I think I'm probably the most accessible governor the state's had for a long time. I've often said that half the people in the state, I think, have my cell phone number, and that's okay. But if you have questions for me, I'm not hard to find.
Rhoden is one of 4 Republican candidates running for governor. The Republican primary election is June 2nd, and early voting is underway. The winner of the Republican primary will advance to the November general election to face Democratic candidate Dan Allers. That's all we have for this episode of Searchlight Report. Audio for this episode of the podcast came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight's staff, editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Mackenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Megan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.